I'm Garrett Oliver, and I'm a beer expert. Boom. Zap. Pilsner. Now, this is a great place to start because actually Pilsner or types of Pilsner are the most popular beers in the world. And Pilsner is really difficult to brew because there's actually nowhere to hide. There's only 4 things that traditionally go into a Pilsner: barley malt, yeast, hops, water. You don't have all kinds of other things. You don't have roasted malts. You don't have a really huge hop character. You don't have barrel aging. You don't have many other things that can be done with beer. With Pilsner, you have those few ingredients, and they'd better be good. All right, let's see what we've got going on here. All right. Now we're pouring from a can. In the old days, that would have been a bad sign. Not so much these days. This actually looks really nice. You have a full antique gold color. You have a nice fluffy head going on here. This is what a Pilsner should look like. It should not have any brownish or reddish casts to it. It's beautifully clear. It has a nice kind of rocky foam to it. Different sizes of bubbles. When you see all the same size of bubbles, that's usually a giveaway, as it is in bread, that you don't really have the real thing going on. So here in the aroma, I have a nice floral character. There is that little bit of typical sulfur. This is actually smelling pretty nice. All right, let's check out B. Now, we have a bottle here, but that does not necessarily mean that it's more expensive. We don't know. Now, right away, I see that color is a little bit different. Slightly browner. The foam has a different look to it. Much more fine bubbles. And the aroma is, for Pilsner, a little bit odd. I'm getting a kind of a light banana kind of character going on here, slightly papery. B is not an unpleasant smelling beer, but it doesn't really have true Pilsner characteristics. All right, let's taste A. Zap. That has a real zing of bitterness to it, which is what we like to see in Pilsner. So if you have an all-malt beer, you're going to have a roundness, you're going to have a sweetness, a little bit of biscuity, bready flavor in the background. And the thing that makes Pilsner refreshing is that zap of bitterness. It should be clean, it should be quick. You can taste also that this was not rushed. This is actually pretty decent Pilsner. This is pretty appetizing. Let's taste B. All right, this has a character of sweetness and fizziness, but really very, very little bitterness. As it goes down, it opens up onto some fruit, not unpleasantly, but definitely not traditionally. And really almost no depth at all. You start with fizz and maybe a little bit of banana, and then the beer kind of vanishes from your palate. I will say this for it. You know that this came from a place that has a laboratory and everything else because they're working hard actually to remove the flavor from it. The problem is, it doesn't taste that good. Well, I'm going to say that A is the more expensive one, but let's see where we've ended up. I didn't expect to see a 0 at the beginning of one of these numbers. So, here you have one that's under $1 for 12 ounces, and this is more than $1.50. But I'm going to tell you what, if you think about it, what can you buy for 60 cents? Really almost nothing. This is actually not a bad price for a full-flavored Pilsner, whereas this may be cheaper. Is it really worth it to get something that's almost completely empty? Now we've got Belgian-style wheat beer, and so this is actually a type of a throwback in a way. These days, most people are making beer, traditional beer, out of barley malt, but in the old days, you made it out of whatever you had at hand. So traditionally, this style of beer would have been made from about half wheat and half barley malt. For the spicing, yes, they added hops, but they also added Curacao orange peel and coriander. All right, well, let's check out A here. No tells in our glass. We do have a pretty good look, though. It's a little bit dark for the style. Normally, this style of beer is going to be very, very pale. This has kind of a dark gold orange kind of color to it. The foam looks pretty good, a little bit of open bubbles and some finer bubbles. This level of haze is normal for this style of beer. Traditionally, this would have been re-fermented in the bottle and would be served with its yeast. A little bit pasta-like, not surprising, with wheat. A little bit of coriander, but the coriander here, it smells a little bit like hot dogs. Which actually is one of the flavorings in hot dogs is coriander. So if you use it a little heavily, you get a little bit of a hot dog character. Well, let's see what B has going on here. Ah, there we go. Now that is the traditional color. Much, much paler. This has a beautiful glow to it, full rocky head. And that's lovely. That smells great. Bright, fresh, floral. That smells pretty appetizing. Well, let's taste A. Wow. Very sweet, a little bit bland, not much in the way of bitterness. Very broad across the tongue, not really snappy, doesn't have a really fine type of carbonation to it. Kind of a little bit sweet, a little bit creamy. At least it doesn't taste like hot dogs, but not really the bright, fresh character that I would, hope to expect. And let's see what we've got going on here in B. Still smells great. Boom. Bright spritz, very fine bubbles across the palate, bright orange peel character, a nice, clean, focused bitterness. If we didn't have more beers to taste, I would finish this glass. I would say that B is definitely the more expensive beer. The color of beer A is attractive. It started off with pretty good foam. It's almost like a cartoon of the idea of what Belgian wit beer is supposed to be, while this seems more like the real thing. Well, let's see how we did here. I'd be pretty surprised if it turned out otherwise, but yeah, again, almost twice the price. A Belgian white beer doesn't actually need to come from Belgium. There are a lot of nice American versions, but you need brightness, you need freshness. You should be seeing that pale sort of color to it, and it has to be really refreshing. The problem with A is that it wasn't even refreshing. It just kind of laid there, while B had a really beautiful pop to it. And that's worth that extra $1, believe me. All right, IPA. Many people who drink IPA might not even know that the name means India Pale Ale. This was originally a style of beer that, starting in the late 1700s, was being made in the UK, sent down around the south of Africa, up into the Indian Ocean, and into a port in Calcutta. And it was actually a provision that was sent there for British colonialists. So this style of beer was made in a particular way to be able to travel well, dry, sharp, bitter, highly aromatic. Hops give you flavors and aroma and bitterness, but also hops act as a preservative. So adding lots of hops was a particular way of getting IPA to actually last in a big wooden barrel for what could be a 6-month sea voyage. All right, let's see what we've got here with A. Would have been some years back that you would never have seen an IPA in a can, but these days it's actually kind of a common thing. Now, one thing I can tell right away is that if this is an IPA, this is a very modern take on IPA. IPAs were traditionally clear, but these days, especially in the last couple of years, you see a lot of them that have, this very, very hazy appearance. And that has an enormous hop aroma. It's just leaping out of the glass. Hops are varietal like wine grapes. There are dozens of varieties. It's one of the more expensive things that you use in beer if you're using a lot, and this definitely has a lot. Nicely done, very bright, very fresh. And now let's check out B. All right, a pretty dark color here. A little bit darker than we generally see in IPAs these days, but that's not a bad thing. So this aroma is really different. It's a bit more biscuity, more sort of malt focused. It does have a hop aroma. It has a beautiful rocky head to it, a fairly nice appearance. Wasn't supposed to drink yet. But definitely 100% malt beer. The thing is, though, it doesn't really have that massive hop aroma. For me, that's a little bit of a tell because the hops are so expensive. If you have a lot of hops in the beer, you have a massive hop aroma, it's one of the things that's going to cause a beer to be more expensive. All right, let's see what A tastes like. Lots and lots of hop flavor. The bitterness is soft but balanced, and it's long. It kind of keeps going and going and going. It's not tremendously sharp, but the hop flavor is really sitting there on your tongue, almost like you had, I don't know, citrus powder and mango and things like that going on. But it tastes pretty good throughout. Now here in B, you have something that almost tastes like a little bit of a throwback to the older, original British style. Clean, sharp, well brewed, but a little bit of a metallic tang. You often see that with some breweries that are using extracts and things like that. You have a little bit of a sort of almost chemical edge. But from a technical point of view, not a badly made beer at all. Both of these are perfectly decent beers. I'd be happy to drink either one of them. But when it comes to what's more expensive, first I like A better and its massive use of hops. It tastes like it costs 2 or 3 times as much just to make it in the first place. So I'm definitely going with A here. Yeah, that's a pretty big difference. Both these beers are definitely worth drinking. If I'm having some really spicy food, especially something with citrus going on in it, I'd probably go for A and that big citrus pop. But the biscuity character of B really rose in perfectly fine with a burger, pizza, something like that. In an IPA, there's a few things you're looking for. Generally speaking, dry, highly aromatic, lots of hops, somewhere between 5.5% and 7% alcohol by volume. Most of all, IPAs have to be fun to drink. I mean, one reason why IPAs are so popular is, frankly, they're fun on your tongue. They're explosive. And A is pretty explosive. Dark Lager. Now, earlier we looked at Pilsner. This is our second lager style. Pilsner eventually took over the world. What people had before then was dark lagers. Well, let's see what's going on here with A. Kind of a full, deep, amber-looking color. Look at that foam. That is beautiful. That foam is really indicative of a really nicely brewed beer. It's rocky. It has texture to it. It stands up. It's so fine over here. Sort of creamy looking. Boy, that smells good. A little bit smoky, toffee-like, just layers and layers of depth. Often these types of beers, dark lagers, are thought of as almost the beer equivalent of a freshly baked loaf of dark bread. And that's kind of what this smells like. Beautiful caramelization. That's kind of awesome. Let's see what we've got going on here. He's got tough competition, guy. Much less deep color. I mean, not a bad color. The foam is not nearly so well formed. There's a lot more kind of big open bubbles. It doesn't have that kind of rocky tightness that you have going on in A, and does not have the full sort of deep mahogany sort of color. It's attractive. Much more simplistic aroma. What I'm smelling basically is caramel. Mostly pale malt, a golden malt, a pilsner malt, mixed with some very dark other malts and giving a light caramel character. Now here we have the flavor and aroma, I should say, of Munich malt. Munich malt is a more difficult and expensive type of malt to make. It is kind of lightly caramelized, but when you make the entire mash out of Munich malt, that flavor is concentrated. So whereas in B, you have the caramel character as more of a flavoring added on top, here it's used throughout. Let's check out A. I can't wait to drink it, actually. Boom. Everything in place. Very soft bitterness. This is really a style of beer that's all about malt. Very slightly sweet, very creamy, beautiful texture. It sort of makes me look forward to the holidays or something. I feel like I should have a big roasted piece of meat in front of me or something like that. Now here in B, kind of light, acidic, caramel character, very one-dimensional. Not in any way unpleasant. It's clean. Not as sweet as A, but that's not technically a fault. It just overall isn't as fun to drink. I'm going to say here that A is the more expensive. That is like really traditional Bavarian style dark lager, and I find that B is a little bit wanting, but let's see what we've got. All right, about twice as expensive, and where that expense is really going to come in is the malt. Real Munich malt, traditionally made, that's going to deliver that depth of flavor that you're looking for. You're really looking for that big, bready, toffee-like character. And if you don't smell that going on, if you can't taste that going on in the palate, you haven't really got the real thing. It's easy to get the color. You can always add all kinds of caramelized sugars, you can add caramelized malts, but that flavor that you have going on in A, that's the thing that's going to cost money. You have a lot of interest these days in hops, but when it comes to dark lagers, Munich malt is kind of where it's at. Now, when brewers mention barrel-aged beers, a lot of people will say to us, oh, you've gotten some wonderful ideas from the wine people. Well, actually, we've been putting beer in barrels for about 2,000 years now. The stainless steel keg only showed up in the 50s or 60s, but until then, it was wood. Wood is porous, so you always have a little bit of oxygen filtering in through the wood. That is one of the things that ages wines. It also ages beers, and often in a pleasant way. Remember, all the barrels are being filled and emptied by hand, so that's a lot of work for somebody. Anytime you see a real barrel-aged beer, it's almost always going to have some expense to it. But there are tricks, and they are sometimes used. You can take a barrel and chip it up into pieces. If you put those barrel chips in a tank, you can get some of those flavors, but not all of them. So let's see what we've got going on here. Let's open up A. Rather dark color we've got going on here. Nice foam. That foam is coming up to a very sort of creamy look here, and then more of a rocky surface. Normally when you see a beer that has this kind of color, that's going to largely be from roasted malts. There is a really beautifully fruity, lightly peaty sort of character. I kind of suspect a Scotch barrel here, and it smells like real wood. It's very soft in its aromatics. When people are doing really fast barrel aging or they're using chips, you have usually a really straightforward vanilla coconut sort of character going on, where here you've got some real depth. That's smelling awfully nice. Oh, now let's open B. Much paler color, though that doesn't mean anything. You can barrel age even very pale beers and they can pick up lots of wonderful characteristics. Well, it smells like there's definitely some wood going on there. A little bit of vanilla, a little bit of coconut, the malt's going on underneath. It really kind of just smells a little bit like wood. That is nice foam, though. A nice, more or less rocky foam. It's not bad looking. It has a nice color to it, kind of a honey-like color. I mean, overall, it smells pretty pleasant, but not certainly not distinguished by a good amount of time in a barrel. Let's taste A. That's pretty, wow. I can barely talk now. This tastes not only like dark chocolate, which is more or less the underlying beer. It's got that beautiful softness that really speaks to barrel aging time. So this is soft, round, it's got a beautiful fruitiness going on. I can definitely tell that this was not done with chips or powders or anything else. This spent a decent amount of barrel aging time. All sorts of characters going on. There's always going to be some vanilla, always going to be a little bit of coconut, but that's pretty gorgeous. Let's taste B. B is a perfectly decent beer, but frankly a little bit disappointing. What I'm getting mostly here is kind of a sweetness. That honey color is appropriate because it has a honeyed sort of flavor, a little bit of vanilla going on, and it's pleasantly juicy. So it's actually a pretty well put together beer. But if you're looking for something with like real barrel character, I'm not really getting that here. This beer could taste a lot like this without the barrel. I'm going to go with A as the more expensive beer, simply because it has a great deal of depth to it. You have so much going on that clearly came from a decent amount of time in the barrel, where B is tasting more straightforward. It was either a very short barrel aging time or possibly some of those other methods that I mentioned. So let's see what goes on here. Wow. Okay, that's a pretty big difference, an even bigger difference than I expected. To tell you the truth, B didn't do all that badly, considering that this is like 4.5 times the price. But the thing is, I'm not that surprised in a certain way. If I had to guess, I would say that A had been in the barrel for over a year, and if B saw an actual barrel at all, I would basically put it at a month or two. This would actually be very nice with a pork chop. I would say that basically it's worth the money, but it's not worth what that is worth. This is a specialty beer that would be a bit more of a special occasion, a much more interesting experience than B. Fruit sours. Now, you may say to yourself, why would I want a beer that's sour? Well, in the world of drinks, generally speaking, you either have citrus juice as the basis for a cocktail, or you have bitters. The same used to be true of beer, and in the old days, when it was done properly, this was considered very pleasant, and in barrel, people would often add fruit. But in the last 100 years or so, we kind of sheared away the whole acidic side of beer. So just even in looking at these, you have two different packaging styles. The more elaborate here, B, is the traditional style. Now, you might look at that and say that's a champagne cork, but actually, champagne is in a beer bottle. And the technique that's generally used for the secondary fermentation to do these kinds of beers, where you add sugar, extra yeast, and allow the second fermentation to happen inside the bottle, that actually was beer first, and then later champagne. But the champagne guys have better PR. All right, let's see what we've got going on here. Maybe our color is going to tell us something, and it kind of does. Kind of looks more like raspberry than anything else. You gotta love the pink foam. It's a beautiful color. It's got a little bit of haze to it. Aromatically, somewhere between raspberry, cherryish. Pretty straightforward. Nice foam. It looks good. Nice color. Nice berry characteristics. All right, in B, we have a much more elaborate style of packaging here. If you want to talk about expense, you're going to start here. And what do we have going on? Aha. Wow. That looks like something that Dracula might drink. It's got some brownish color to it, but even that tells us something. It looks like it's actually taken on some age. You usually start to get some browning of the fruit. Whoa. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. So we have a little bit of a slight vinegar character on top, a little bit of acetic acid, almost always an indication of wood. A distinctive also fruit character. You also have definitely some wild yeast going on in here. Wild yeast give you a whole other range of funky flavors, reminiscent of forest floor, but not in a bad way, in a way that like you might feel the same way about some great cheeses. So let's taste A. A great color there, a little brusque, a little broad. I kind of expected something a little zingier. It kind of lays a little bit heavy. There's some residual sugar there. Almost tastes to me like it was added back because it doesn't have a big underlying malt character, which you would kind of expect if it was what we call residual sugar, meaning sugar left behind by yeast. So let's see if B here is going to do any better for us. Wow. That's really fun. It has a cherry-like characteristic to it. Very sour, but well integrated. It's not always an easy thing to match the acidity of the fruit itself together with the acidity of the underlying beer. But here it's been done really nicely. Definitely some barrels here as well. A beer that was aged in a barrel is almost never going to look like A. It's going to look more like B here. So these guys are two really different types of fruit sours. I would definitely go for B as the more expensive beer. It almost certainly has a barrel going on. It tastes stronger as well, which means more malt, which means more expense. So let's see what we've got here. Whoa, that is the biggest difference that we've seen so far. If you're starting with something relatively simplistic, that's relatively easy to get, not difficult, not seasonal, etc., it's going to be cheaper. But this barrel, all that handling, greater strength, etc., each one of these elements is going to add more and more expense to this beer. But as a result, here you have something that'd be perfectly pleasant with a cheesecake or something like that. But here you could get the best goat cheese that you could possibly imagine, aged goat cheese, and pair that up. A is pleasant, but B is definitely worth a lot more money. The great thing about beer is that it's actually deep and wide and tall. Beer has all sorts of characteristics. It can be like chocolate. It can taste like coffee. It can taste like barrels, vanilla. So beer can taste like almost anything. So when you get out to the market and you see a few things, they're usually not that expensive, even if they're more expensive than the cheapest one. Have some fun.